It's very exciting for me to introduce our speaker tonight, Rabbi Dr. Ariel Stone, who I've been going back and forth with via email, and I think even once over the phone since I started working on this project almost a year ago. Though this is the first time we're meeting face to face, albeit over Zoom. And Rabbi Dr. Stone is a student of Byron Sherwin. She's a leader of the Portland Jewish community, and in fact, the longest serving congregational rabbi in Portland, Oregon. She currently works with Shir Tikvah in the Commons, TischPDX, and the Clergy Leadership Incubator. She received her doctorate in Jewish Studies from Spertus Institute in 2010 under the direction of Rabbi Dr. Byron Sherwin, Zichrono Livracha, and is the author of Because All Is One, written under Dr. Sherwin's guidance, as well as the Alef Bet of Death, Dying as a Jew. Rabbi Ariel, thank you so much for agreeing to talk about this topic, which I've been hoping we would do some webinar with for, again, about a year since we first met and talked about this topic a little bit. So without further ado, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Jason. And yes, I feel that, you know, ever since Dr. Sherwin left this planet, the three of us and others have been doing all we can to keep him with us in the important ways. Everything he taught, everything he meant comes back to me over and over again as I continue in my own path of learning and of teaching. He's always coming to mind for me at moments when I'm pondering what to do or how to do it. And one of the things that I'm most grateful for was the humongous amounts of paper that we would get every time we took a course in a doctoral program that I was enrolled in. We would come for seminars and we would get, you know, don't tell the trees this, but this was before there were flash drives, I think. And Dr. Sherwin believed it was absolutely essential that we have access to all the primary texts that we were studying, and that we'd have them in a way that would allow us to use them in the future. I learned about the golem with Dr. Sherwin. I don't even remember how long ago, but it was absolutely foundational learning for me. From the first day when I wasn't sure how he was going to make the points that he presented in the overview of the course. What is this about golems and corporations? What is this about golems and medical care in the 20th century? But one of the things that I found out about Dr. Sherwin is that the things that sounded the most unlikely when he looked toward the future of trends already present wasn't unlikely. He was just too far ahead of the curve for the rest of us to realize that what he was saying was not outlandish. It was actually just around the corner. I am going to start sharing my screen with you. And Dr. Schwartz, I am not looking at the chat. I am going to leave that to you in terms of what kind of questions may come up that you would like to make sure get noticed and get commented upon. So I thank you in advance for that.
Yes, of course. If I may.
Yes, please.
If you look at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you will see that there's a button that says Q&A.
Oh, I see it.
Yes, yes, well, if you have a question, you could type it there too, but this is mainly for...
Oh, I see. Sorry, you're not talking to me. I can see it.
But if you do have a question, you can click there, to type it in.
Hmm.
And then at the end of the lecture, we'll have a moderated Q&A,
Oh,
and
lovely.
we will go through your questions.
Thanks. So without further ado, what is the golem and why are we talking about it? I got to figure out how to make, or what do Fantasia, Frankenstein, and fake meat have in common? So I'm going to start by introducing this concept, which is one that we all know if we know anything at all about the Jewish story of how the world was created, which is to say that God creates the world. We all take that for granted. We see it every year when we're reading Bereshit. But I'd like to point out something that you may know and is going to be really important for our conversation. God creates using speech. God says, Yehi or, let there be light. Vayehi or, and there was light. Here we have it in Bereshit, chapter 1, verse 3. One of the concepts that develops from this idea is that we who are created in God's image understand that there are things that God does that we can do in our own way. As Dr. Sherwin put it, God creates, we recreate. In Hebrew, the word davar can mean both word and thing. And this lends a certain understanding to the idea that words themselves can create. A davar, as a word, having the same kind of weight as a thing, is not an entirely unknown idea to us when we say that one's word is one's bond, for example, that if you give your word, you can't take it back. It's a thing that you've done. We understand that idea that we can speak and a reality can be created. But the thing that is so interesting about what our ancestors do in Jewish tradition, not all of them, but those with a more chutzpahdik mystical bent, those who push the envelope a little further, those people say, if we are created in the image of God, and if we are able to be like God to a certain extent, what does that mean? How far can we push that? And what happens when we do? A very ancient book, well, at least it's understood to be ancient book, called Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, has within it these following words: 22 letter elements. That's the Hebrew alphabet. With 22 letter elements, he outlined them, hewed them out, weighed them, combined them, transformed them, and through them created the soul of all creation and everything that was ever to be created. This is the beginning of a world of possibilities. But before I go on to talk about the possibilities, I wanted to show you one of those primary texts that Dr. Sherwin made sure that we got a copy of. And you can see here a way of combining the letters, as Sefer Yetzirah indicates. You take the letter Aleph here on the right, down in the chart on the right-hand side toward the lower part. The first letter is an Aleph and the second the Lamed. And the second couplet is Bet and Tav, and so on and so forth. You are making every conceivable combination of these two letters, and then two more letters, and then two more letters. And what is the point of this? Actually, it's kind of an alchemy of words, an alchemy of letters, I should say, and then hopefully of words. If the world is created through words, then what are the chances that you and I can create something using those same elements, those same words? Perhaps the first person to wonder about this tried just saying he-oh and seeing what happened. Not likely though, because our ancestors understood that what God did was not what we are able to do. So in a very interesting bit in the Babylonian Talmud, in the tractate Sanhedrin, we see an indication of what some of our ancestors were able to do. In Sanhedrin, we read that Rava, a rabbi, created a gavra and sent him to Rav Zera, another rabbi. The word gavra might simply be the Aramaic word for gever, the Hebrew for a man. But this is no ordinary man if Rava has created him. What in the world could it possibly mean to say that Rava created a man and sent him anywhere? What is this? Is it some kind of show-off activity where Rava's sending over to Rav Zera something and saying, can you do this? We don't know. But Rav Zera knew right away that it was not a real, quote unquote, gever, not a real human being. How did Rav Zera know? By speaking to it. Here's the other interesting aspect of the creative power of words and the way our ancestors see the power of words. The human being is described as the medaber, the chai medaber, the living one that speaks. When Rav Zera speaks to this human-seeming being, and it does not reply, it seems here that he can understand that it is not a human being. It is what we might call a golem, even though that word does not appear in the text. He says something interesting here for our purposes. Rav Zera says, return to your dust, from which we understand perhaps that the creature was created from dust. Not a surprise, once we recall that human beings are created by God from dust. So what's the difference? What's the difference between God creating and us recreating? Dr. Sherwin used to say that whatever we do as reflections of God have to be understood as just like you looking in a mirror in terms of the real human being that you are. There's very little in common between you and your reflection in the mirror. What's the difference between God creating and us recreating? According to Rava, the more righteous we are, the more we can create. The proof text comes from Isaiah 59, and it's fascinating. It is your sins that separate you from your God, meaning it is the fact that we are not perfect. That means that we cannot create a perfect being like a human being. If a human being was completely free from sin, completely righteous, the shocking implication is that there would be nothing that separated them from God. So Rava, by using this proof text and giving us this explanation, is basically saying, I'm not perfect. He is, on the other hand, also saying something pretty shocking to our sensibilities. If we have the typical human sense that God is very far from us, which is, if only we were completely righteous, nothing would separate us from God. As it is, Rava is not God, and therefore Rava can create a Gavra, but cannot give the Gavra speech. And it's important to note that the things which we make, which seem almost human, are always going to be lacking in some essential way. This is a recipe for creating a golem, which comes from a commentary to this same book, Sefer Yetzirah. Again, you can see dust and combinations of the Alef Bet. A new element here is not only water, which one might say is an obvious need if you are creating something out of dirt, but running water. Running water is an interesting concept to consider because running water, living water, is also necessary for example, for the mikvah, for a human being to successfully traverse a transition from one state to another. I still remember when Dr. Sherwin taught us in class one day these words that I have here in Hebrew. Avra kedavra. I will create as I speak. The ultimate statement of golem making or of world making. Abracadabra. And so it was that in medieval Europe, the rumors grow apparently from the original Talmudic stories. It's not clear that people are passing them down in any regular way. It's not as if we've got a book of Grimm's Jewish fairy tales that we're using. For some understandable historical and cultural reasons, which we'll get to with the Golem of Prague, it makes sense that medieval European Jews at least attracted legends around them that they were doing this thing. And so different rabbis who were understood to be wonder workers in their day, powerful community leaders, were able, it is said, both by Jews and non-Jews, to have the ability to create not quite human beings who would assist them in tasks. Now, like many stories that are told over time among human beings, sooner or later, a dark cloud often begins to emanate from some part of the story. In the course of the narratives that emerge about golem making, somewhere along the line, the golem becomes dangerous. And it's interesting to note that while golem making can be dangerous, the source of danger is not from the golem, but from the creator of the golem. Mistakes in creation do not impair the golem, they destroy its creator. So, for example, the way to animate a golem, when all else has been done and all of the appropriate letter combinations have been uttered, and we don't exactly know how it works. You don't simply walk around a pile of clay and say, come to life, come to life, come to life. And what exactly you do was never written down anywhere. Anybody who wrote some of it down didn't write down the rest. It's a typical mystical dodge to end a partial explanation by saying, Hamavin Yavin, the one who knows will understand. But a very important part of some of the legends indicates that writing the word emet in the forehead of the clay creature makes it animated. Rabbi Elias, unfortunately, made too big a golem. And in the course of getting the emet off its forehead, apparently he wasn't paying attention to gravity or something. And when the golem immediately reverted to lifeless mud, it caused a small avalanche and actually killed the rabbi. This is an important development in the idea of the golem. Now we understand that aspects of the golem are not harmless and they can get out of control. Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague is credited or blamed, depending on who you ask, with the ultimate creation of a golem. It's important that you know that Rabbi Judah Loew of Prague never made a golem, according to anybody who was a contemporary of his, but because of his power and his leadership and his renown, the story of the golem of Prague was attached to him. This is a statue that exists in Prague today. So why do stories about golems start to spread in certain parts of medieval Europe? Well, if you are a defenseless group of people and you are looking for protection, the golem develops the legendary ability to be the protector. It is not just a menial laborer. It is a very large and powerful menial laborer. The Maharal, the name for Rabbi Loew, the way he's called, the Maharal created a golem for the benefit of his people in Prague. And the idea was that this golem would be a quiet household laborer most of the time. But if necessary, this golem would protect the Jews of Prague. From that day to this, there have been a flourishing of golem legends. This is a page from a modern book which tells the legend of the golem of Prague. By now, he's a big guy. He's scary. He stomps around in the ghetto at night, scaring everybody and everything. I imagine it was easier to get your kids to come home at dark when the golem was around than at any time before or since. But he was a good scary guy. At least he was good to those he was protecting. At least that was the intent. It becomes fascinating to consider, of course, the obvious corollary to the story of Frankenstein. another artificially created being. The legend of the golem, which depicts the golem getting out of control, similar to the Frankenstein story, and forgive me, but all I can think of right now is Young Frankenstein, which I saw recently. The theme, though, seems to be that the monster, and it's too bad that we have to use that term for Frankenstein's creature, it wasn't necessarily scary or evil or destructive, but only perhaps misunderstood, misused, even abused, which then brings out the negativity, right? Then brings out the evil. The creature itself is neither bad nor good. The uses to which it is put, the way in which it is treated, that which is done with it and by it, bring out, interestingly enough, more often than not, the nightmare version. I was shocked to go to Prague and discover a small note being accompanying each golem sold that talked about its creation by the evil rabbi of Prague, but then it was not Jews selling it. So we've alluded more than a few times now to some of the difficulties that come with the creation of something that is animate in its own way. The creation, the human creation of something which cannot be perfect because we are not perfect. And now, of course, we come to that glorious bit from Fantasia, in which the sorcerer's apprentice wants nothing more than just a little help doing the work. If you recall in that bit of the movie, it starts out really beautifully, and then in the same way as the golem stories, something goes wrong, something goes out of control. The thing that goes wrong seems to be no big deal. It's a small glitch. It's a burp in the code. It's not a big deal until it gets out of control. And of course, the story of the 19th and 20th century fiction around this theme is that which gets out of control. That seems like it's okay until it's not. And then once it's not, what do we do? So here is where we will plunge just a bit into what's problematic about corporations. And as Jason said, corporation, corpus, that's a body, but it's a little bit of a move from a body to a person. So what happens? How is it that corporations today, you may remember famously when presidential candidate Mitt Romney said, hey, friend, corporations are people too. And it's actually legally true to a certain extent. Citizens United, which is in the third paragraph on this slide, is only the continuation of a legal trend that began earlier. As Dr. Sherwin used to talk about, the railroads were built by these railroad corporations that were the very first to start to push this idea of how do you treat this entity, which is made up of people, but more than people in some way. It's complicated, but I want to go to the bottom line of this legal concept known as corporate personhood in Justice Rehnquist's dissent in this last paragraph. Corporations are artificial persons rather than natural persons. They are artificial persons. In that way, they are golems. So what's the problem? Golems are created to serve us. What could possibly go wrong? So here's what happens when corporations don't go wrong, or when artificiality doesn't go wrong, you might say. It can really bless our lives in so many ways. People talk about how artificial meat is an answer to global warming because we can cut down on the number of cows that are kept and produce methane. And it's interesting to know that, and this one's in here for you, Yitz. When I first mentioned to Dr. Schwartz that we have a place in the Talmud in which two rabbis make their Shabbat dinner using Sefer Yetzirah every week, it's pretty amazing to consider. But if you could make a human being, then all it takes is a creative brain to start wondering, well, what else could I make? So Rav Hanina and Rav Ushaya learned Sefer Yetzirah, and they didn't create a gavra, they didn't create a human, they created a calf, and then they ate it. At the other end, though, of that spectrum of, can we make food for ourselves? Can we make food better for ourselves? Can we somehow make food and food supply more certain for ourselves? We have seen what seemed like a good idea gone out of control. There are now 4 multinational agribusinesses that monopolize 60% of the world's seed trade. I'm not sure my figures are right, but I believe there's something like 400 or 500 kinds of apples in the world. And we will never see more than a couple, because it's not financially viable. Because when you do things in bulk, or when you do things in large amounts to bring down the price for the individual, you have to systematize. You have to standardize. And from there, we go to maximizing returns. And somewhere along the way, what we realize is that we've minimized pleasure. We've minimized diversity of experience. Giant monocrop farms drive small farmers out of business, create situations nobody could have understood or expected in terms of the kinds of disease that can occur as a result, or even out of convenience. We've got one particular crop and it works really well, and then one kind of mold or virus or something comes along and devastates just that one crop. And that's all there is. Interestingly enough, Jewish law doesn't know anything about artificial persons like corporations. Presented with the exact same situation, Jewish law sees in front of us partnerships. Partnerships in which each partner still individually and collectively has a responsibility for what the group does. There is no such thing as a corporate shield that shields individuals, morally or legally, for the actions taken on their behalf by a corporation. Rava's golem was considered flawed because Rava himself was flawed. How can we know when we create something and say, this seems like it will work well, what could go wrong? How do we know what flaws we have built into our creation? So as we already noted, an out-of-control golem can be neutralized simply by taking the emet off of its forehead. But you don't even have to take off the whole emet. It's very interesting to look at and consider the letters that are written on a golem's forehead in order to bring it to animation. Alef Mem Tav, the word truth. The word truth animates. How the mystics come to this understanding will never be completely explained. Although there's an easy explanation, which is that the Aleph and the Tav are the beginning and the end of the alphabet. The Mem is not precisely the center because there can be no center in 22 letters, but it's close. And so it could be understood that the word emet is encompassing all of creation in some way, referring to all of creation in some way, and in some way bringing it into the moment of creation of the golem. Other possibilities are also true. I like the one in which we suggest that the emet is not only there to animate it, but also to be its guiding principle. A golem must react truly out of its creation as a result of the stimuli that it encounters. There's no subterfuge, there's no faking it when you're a golem. Returning a golem to dust is as easy as erasing the first letter. When you erase the first letter of this word emet, you are left with the word met, dead. The difference between that one letter, the Aleph, that letter that stands for God, that which is beyond us, that which is perfection, that which is not ours, that which we will never reach. That one letter makes all the difference. It makes all the difference in our behavior as well. If we see the golem as a projection of our own creative efforts across the board, no matter what it is we're trying to do, the truth of our effort, as opposed to an effort that can't be animated, is a fascinating thing to think about. For Jews and for Jewish ethics, it is simple to note that that Aleph is both a reference to God, which is beyond us, and that which is most innermost within us, that which we know to be the essence of our lives. What it comes down to reminds me an awful lot of the difference between, and I'm not sure there's much of a difference depending on who you ask, the difference between these two photographs, or the similarity of these two photographs. The high priest was described in the Torah, and also by Josephus for that matter, as wearing on the forehead a golden crown. Feels like a big word for it. I like to think of it as a nameplate that says Kodesh Lashem, holy to Hashem. The high priest, when working, when in priestly robes, went around with a mark on his forehead saying, this is what I'm doing, and this is who I am answerable to. The golem had emet on his head. The high priest has Kodesh Lashem on his head. It's, what do you worship? What do you believe in? Where are you deriving your strength, your belief, your truth? And how do you practice it in the world? it occurred to me that corporation logos are everywhere in our lives. They are on a soccer player's shirt. They're on any sports player's shirt, frankly. But they are in so many more places. There's something very interesting about the place of corporations in our lives, those that benefit and those that are out of control. Where are we putting our trust? And as our ancestors have long pointed out to us, to what extent can you really put your trust in the work of your hands? So I end with at least as many, I can't find my cursor, but I'm ending, there we go, with at least as many questions as I started with. And I am looking forward to hearing any reactions that anybody has.
Much, Rabbi Ariel.
Okay.
Well, like I said before, if anyone does have any questions, you can either type them into the chat or type them using the Q&A function, which will allow you to ask a question where only we'll be able to see your question. Both are located at the bottom of your Zoom screen, the chat icon and the Q&A icon. Now, I'd actually like to start with a question because, you know, when you were
Good.
talking about wiping the word emet off the golem, or wiping out the aleph, right, so that you take away the aleph and you're left with met, dead, to kill the golem. You know what I thought of? Another thing that I think has been in a lot of people's minds lately: artificial intelligence, right? Because you know, you have this sort of, you know, so many sci-fi, you know, novels, and, you know, I guess most famously the novel and then movie I, Robot, where they pose the question of, you know, what are the ethics involved in creating artificial life, right? And what I wondered is, have you come across anything that might shed light, or maybe this question was, you know, just sort of too far away, you know, from you know, maybe it's too much of a modern question. But have you come across anything where people are sort of dealing with the question of, well, okay, you know, you create a golem, and to what extent does that golem have the rights of a person, or you know, well, you know, and perhaps if the golem can't speak, then, you know, maybe it would be considered not completely sentient. But I don't know. Have you seen anything about that? You know, I was thinking of the scene in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the astronaut is trying to turn off the computer, and the computer's pleading for its life. You know, so yeah, have you come across anything like that?
Oh, sure. The scene when the computer very calmly says, "I can't do that, Hal," is the ultimate fear that is being expressed through the golem legend. When the golem no longer needs its creator. Dr. Sherwin talks about that in more in terms of the art of what is the, in two ways actually. In one of them, he notes that there were rabbis who wondered whether a golem could be included in a minyan. And there are some rabbis who say yes and some who say no. And it kind of makes you wonder how much trouble were they having finding a minyan if they were trying to figure out ways of getting the golem into it, right? You would think that someone who can't speak can't be part of the minyan, but remember, in Jewish tradition, there are lots of questions in the Talmud about who can you include in a minyan, and there's no reason necessarily that a mute can't be. A deaf person has certain problems, a blind person has certain problems, a minor, a woman. There are all kinds of disabilities that may cause you not to be counted in a minyan. But it's a really live question, right? There are lots of places where the question, you know, how can you be sure of the capacity of somebody to help make the minyan? Dr. Sherwin also talked about a lot about IVF and other kinds of what does it mean to what extent is this creating life in an artificial way, which is will really make you come up short if you are somebody who's ever had trouble conceiving and wanted to have a child. Well, wait a minute, you telling me I'm having a golem? No, 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 not at all. We're taking the idea of what does it mean to create a life and asking questions that are sort of understandable from the point of view of how spooky people get when you remember Dolly, can you clone a life? Is it okay if it's not okay to clone, is it okay to do IVF? If it's okay to do IVF, what's not okay? Is it okay to say I don't want a child with blue eyes? Is it okay to choose a child's gender? Once we're capable of creating life, not creating it, but recreating it, right? We're not creating the sperm and the egg, but we're recreating them. We're allowing reproduction to occur. Once you're able to do that, what is okay and what isn't okay in the process of doing that? Who are you to tell me I can't have a blue-eyed child if that's what I want? But the moral queasiness we feel about it is precisely found in the nightmare versions of the golem story. There's a lot of uneasiness around the idea that the golem, simply because it can't speak, does that mean it's not killing when Rav Zera says, return to your dust? If there are some rabbis who believe you could count a golem in the minyan, then maybe it'd be better if we weren't doing this stuff, because it's not so clear that it's okay for Rav Zera to say, return to your dust. Later on, when the golem is running amok and you must stop it or people are going to be killed, that's a whole different story. That becomes really the tragedy. That's where you start touching on the themes of the Frankenstein monster. We should never have done this in the first place. If you go back and you read Mary Shelley's novel, that is how it starts, with Frankenstein at the end of his rope and at the end of his life saying, the chutzpah, well, I don't think he says chutzpah, but the hubris, the self-destructive, world-destroying hubris of believing we can touch the hem of God, which of course brings us back to the Babel story and how close can we get? And the mystics play this very edgy game. The closer we get, the more we satisfy our desire to be close to eternity, to understand meaning. But we all know that one wrong step and you're annihilated. There was also a final exam question Dr. Sherwin gave me once, which was, if you took a Jew and put their brain in a computer, would it be a Jewish computer and would it count in a minyan? I don't remember what I said anymore.
I love the Jewish computer question. Now, Alejandra asks a very interesting question, which is, well, with Facebook algorithms, increasing the circulation of images, and she puts it, amplifying polarization. In a way, is that an example of a runaway golem? In other words, these are sort of artificial programs, right, created by people that, over time end up having tremendous impact on human society. Though,
and like Amazon, they're completely out of control.
Right. And what I've often found is that when, whenever you have,
you're muted all of a sudden.
Sorry about that. I was going to say, but what I've often seen, whenever you have these hearings and senators, it's always, it varies based on the week, whether the right or left is angry at Facebook, but they'll ask them, questions, why do you do this, why do you do that? And whoever's representing Facebook will say, well, it's just an algorithm, it's not us.
Yeah, that's the golem right there. So a golem doesn't have to look like a human being, right? It's the essence of what is a golem. A golem is a creation that is then blessed or cursed with its own autonomy, its own animation, and then you lose control of it or the effect it's having. And then you end up flooded if you're in Fantasia.
Right, flooded with way too many spooky broom helpers. Isaac asks, and I want to make sure I'm understanding this question correctly. It seems like two questions. One, wasn't the golem something that was imagined to be a protector of Jews from pogroms, etc., and it did not succeed. However, I suppose that Isaac means that it did not succeed in the sense that the golem ended up going out of control. It wasn't a permanent solution to protecting the Jewish community. On the other hand, in our modern times, though we are imperfect, we were successful in creating golems out of artificial intelligence. I would appreciate your response, and thank you for your enlightening presentation.
Thank you.
So have we more successfully, in a way, created golems than the legendary golems of
The story of the classic story of the Golem of Prague is an amazing, lovely story, right? This innocent golem is created, and it takes care of the community and does whatever it's told. And whenever the Jews are in trouble, it goes out and it saves them. It goes in and stands between them and the mobs. It stops pogroms before they start. It's an amazing blessing. Thank you, Rabbi Judah Lowe. How it was so amazing. By the way, Rabbi Sherwin said he was a descendant of the Maharal. Jason, I think that means you're a descendant of the Maharal.
Guilty as charged.
I just remembered that. At the end of the story, what you find out when it all goes wrong is that the golem is fine. The golem has, as we saw, the golem doesn't have a problem itself. The problem is with the creator. So what happens? Every Friday night before Shabbat, the Maharal would erase the emet from the golem, and the golem would sleep on Shabbat because the kind of menial tasks it did were not Shabbostic tasks. So it would sleep every Shabbat, and then on after Havdalah, it would get the emet written on its head again, and it would go back to another innocent week of helping the Jews. One Friday night, the Maharal forgot to take care of the golem. They had just chanted the psalm for Shabbat, and the golem started rampaging through the Jewish quarter, destructively. The Maharal bravely wades in, confronts the golem, manages to get the emet off its forehead, and it collapses. The Maharal has it taken up to the attic of the Alt Nushul, where it is laid in the attic, laid to rest forever. Then he closes the door to the attic and forbids anyone to go up there ever. Sometime later, another rabbi fasted and prayed for days, went to the mikveh a couple times, and then climbed the stairs to the attic, was overtaken with trembling halfway up, turned around, came back down, and said nobody should ever go up there again. So we don't know if we don't know what's up there. But we also don't know why it went berserk. So have we managed to build more successful golems today? I submit that we don't yet know. Because once you create something with a certain amount of ability to function, you don't know what all of the possible scenarios are that it is going to face. And to believe that you do is to go even farther away from God.
And then, I wonder whether, that kind of trial and error, as disastrous as it may be, might be the only way to get things right, in a way that might be, on the one hand, right, I think the idea coming through from these legends is be careful what you wish for, be careful what you tamper with. On the other hand, it's almost like, if you're gonna do it, the only way you can get it right is with this kind of constantly subjecting the golem to human modification or human guidance, which is an argument that I know few writers writing today have made about algorithms, et cetera. In other words, that we need to be very careful to what degree we give these things autonomy, and we need to be. I'm thinking of this book, The Curse of Bigness, that came out a few years ago, and I'm forgetting the author's name, but he sort of makes that argument, that we have to very consciously monitor technology and make sure it doesn't assume functions that ought to be only for humans.
Right, and the question is, one of the moral conundrums is, once you open that door, can you ever close it again? Should we be making golems at all? Or is that horse out of the barn? Sorry for all the silly metaphors. Once we've started down that path, are we doomed to continue along that path? Right? Is it ever possible to close Pandora's box?
Wow. Well, along those lines, Henry, coming back to the corporation, Henry asks, well then, with the modern corporation, it's often very far removed from its creators, which we can conceive of as the original owners or original founder. And Henry asks what I suppose is a business ethics question. Would the message of the golem idea be that the stockholders should assume the mantle of responsibility for the corporation's actions? And I don't know if you want to go down that very complicated rabbit hole, but I'll leave that up to you.
So if under Jewish law, a corporation is a partnership of people who are all morally responsible for the actions of the group, then the answer would be obvious. If you were a Jew on the board of a corporation or a shareholder of the corporation, then if you felt that the corporation was going off the rails morally, you would want to use your power as a stockholder, I suppose, or as a board of directors person to do what you can to change, to put the Alef back on, right? So you don't have something that's creating death. I'm twisting the idea just a little bit here, but it seems that the distance between the creator and the creation is such a beautifully resonant idea. Again, to get back to the original beautiful quote from Isaiah, it's just distance that causes sin, that causes suffering, that causes us to feel that we only know destruction and despair rather than joy in creation. The distance from the creation is what causes harm to the creation. In the original Mary Shelley book, just to go back to Frankenstein one more time, and it's crazy when you actually read this. I don't know if you've ever read the original novel, but it's worth it. The guy creates this being, And then it opens its eyes, and he's so freaked out that he runs away from it and just kind of hopes it will disappear, which I find to be the most amazingly immoral and irresponsible moment in the whole book. Once you create something, you're responsible for it. And perhaps, again, that's part of the moral weirdness that we feel about corporations, that, as Dr. Sherwin once said, they can commit crimes, but then they're not punished for them. If a human being kills somebody, they may themselves be put to death. It happens. A corporation can kill millions of people, and it cannot be killed. It cannot be ended for that reason. It has rights and privileges of humanhood, but not the responsibilities, and it cannot be punished for its actions in the same way. I find that chilling.
Now, Jason,
Yeah.
ask your question.
Yeah, it's perfect timing because this topic of the distance between the creator and the creation, is something that struck me in your talk, because one of the pressures, I think, that, we identify Facebook, now called Meta, with Mark Zuckerberg. We identify Jeff Bezos with Amazon. So we have these founder CEOs who are, identified with the companies in these cases. There are, several other companies, though, that, Coca-Cola, the founder is long gone, Pepsi-Cola, long gone, right? And GM, wherever else, Ford. And so there, those are instances where we've, increased distance between the creator and the creation just by virtue of the fact that the corporation can continue to live in various ways, not constrained in the same way that a person is constrained. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more on that identification of the companies that, have such, pervasive, I think, impact on our lives today, which are still connected to a founder, but are so large already that, like, Mark Zuckerberg does not know every line of code in every Facebook algorithm that's running right now. Neither does Sergey Brin and Larry Page from Google. Same for Bezos for Amazon, etc. So, but at the same time, I know that CEOs and founders are under this pressure from investors and from market forces to get bigger and make more distance between themselves and their creations. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit more about that, in the historical context, so you could kind of enlighten the things I'm doing today, or others are doing, when they're considering, like, how to bring something technical into the world while also thinking of not ending up like the Sorcerer's Apprentice with your brooms flying all over the place.
Right. And as long as the focus is on the thing we're creating and how to get it right, that's already problematic, right? In the Jewish legend, it's not the creature that has problems, it's the creator. We bestow upon the creation only that which we can give, and our own faults keep us from being able to give it everything we should be able to give it. That's also true of children, right? No parent is perfect. You do the best you can, but you're not God. As your children will tell you when they get to a certain age. One of the things that I hear more and more is the speculation that, as we've seen, too big to fail also means too big to succeed. And the speculation is, well, what happens if we're not so big? Is there something wrong about the idea that something should live and grow larger forever? Is that supportable? I recently had the chance to read Ishmael by Daniel Quinn, which was a fascinating review of what's wrong with the human race, because we don't think we're subject to the same rules as all the rest of the races on the planet. We think we can just fix everything and change everything so we can continue growing. We can continue using and take up more and more space and take up more and more resources. And it's okay. It's okay. We can do whatever we need to so that we can keep having what we want and we can keep growing what we want. If the Jewish legend of the golem teaches us that too big is bad, too big will go wrong, simply because it's no longer manageable, is that telling us something about skyscrapers? Is it telling us something about cities? Is it telling us something about all growth modes, that they can all become deadly just by becoming too big for your own good? There is much in the modern world that seems hell-bent on our own destruction. Is there any connection between the ways in which we don't seem to be fully aware of how the things we're doing are leading to a world which we might manage to destroy, and our taking it as a fundamental belief that we are supposed to grow bigger? That thriving is somehow about more? Maybe we were better off in villages, although Jews never really did thrive much in villages unless it was all Jews, right? So that's one of the really interesting conundrums of this whole thing, that on the one hand, you can't remember more than 200 people's names. Is that the number? I read something like that somewhere. On the other hand, we know Jews haven't thrived in small villages. We know that Jews do better in large cosmopolitan areas, or at least larger cosmopolitan areas where there's enough diversity of human beings that we can be accepted as one more kind of diversity. So maybe there's a sweet spot. We also know that if there aren't enough of us, we interbreed and then we all don't thrive because we don't have enough genetic diversity. But we can't just keep growing bigger and bigger. Bigger is not necessarily better. When you don't know your own company's algorithm, when you don't know where to turn to correct the problem in the thing you created, that's too big. That's morally problematic.
Along those lines, Robbie asks, Lambert asks, can we equate governments to corporations in this respect? How ought we to conceive of our relationship to government in light of this idea?
It's a fascinating idea, really, to think about, right? So all of us supposedly create a democracy. A participatory democracy. But how many of us feel that our government is too far away from us and is not responsive to us? I know that in Portland, Oregon, we're having some issues with that right now.
How many don't feel that way, I think?
Yeah, so it's really interesting to consider. To what extent is a government something that we create, right? Who created this? Whose problem is this? It's another example of, as Jason was saying, of once the founders are gone, it's the incredible irony of golems. They can outlive their creators, and then maybe nobody knows what to do with them after that.
Well, I suppose we have one more question, which takes us back to the bioethics realm, and that's from Neil. Actually, two more questions. So, yes. So Neil asked, how do you think CRISPR might figure into this? And I was wondering that too, right? Because if we can manipulate, you mentioned before, right? The idea of a parent will probably very soon be able to choose what color eyes they want their child to have. Already, there's been some controversy that in was it Finland or Iceland? Doctors have begun encouraging parents to abort children with Down syndrome, which has raised a lot of upset among disability advocates. In other words, are we saying that someone with that kind of different kinds of abilities, ought not to live? But CRISPR brings a whole new bag of worms into this equation, doesn't it?
So I don't know enough about CRISPR. I remember reading about it and then I forgot. Can you remind me of the general outline?
Well, Neil is the doctor. So Neil, can I put you on? I'm going to put you. Oh, actually, Rabbi, you will have to take Neil
What do I have to
off
do?
mute.
I'm putting me on mute. Can I unmute Neil?
I believe you can. I believe that if you, well, I'll tell you what, you want to make me the host and I can do it?
Yeah, I think that's the best thing to do because I'm not sharing anything else.
Where,
So I'm going to make you the host again.
Okay,
Voila.
have the power. All right, here we go. Okay, Neil, I am allowing you to talk. Would you like to elaborate a little on CRISPR?
Sure. First, thank you very much for the lecture. Actually, out of all of Byron's books, Golems Amongst Us was my favorite. So it's kind of interesting. I would encourage you to read The Codebreaker. It discusses a lot of these topics. It's the story of the woman who developed CRISPR, and she participated in the development in her lab. And it goes all the way back from Watson and Crick until today. And in fact, the moral questions that you raise, the same questions that are being raised at the end of the book when they get to the morality. So CRISPR is basically a way of altering the DNA to eliminate genes. And the example they use in the book is Huntington's chorea, that you could actually eliminate the disease ultimately by going in there and eliminating the genes that create that disease. Because it's once you get rid of the gene, then the progeny carry the DNA forward. So going forward, you would no longer have the gene. But at the same time, CRISPR can change genes, alter them, quote, improve them. And then comes the conundrum when it gets out of control and you develop all these other untoward circumstances or problems that occur that one didn't think of. And we are at that technological spot where you can actually go into an embryo and alter their genes or insert genes. And it raises all kinds of questions. I know Byron used to sit on a committee with me. I sit as a chairman of an IRB, in a corporation, in a company that does in vitro fertilization, IVF. And in fact, fortunately or unfortunately, the head of this company actually was in the Wall Street Journal about a decade ago, when the idea that you could actually choose the sex of the child could be actually performed. And there's a lot of discussion about that when this technology and the ability to do so was coming out. And Byron was always the Jewish moral ethicist who raised questions about what was being done and what some of the implications are, and really helped at least me tremendously in trying to wield through these very difficult questions. But that's what CRISPR is. I mean, it basically is a tool that the biologists and the biochemists can now use to alter the, the essence of one's life and carry genes forward. I remember a very interesting part of the book when she won a Nobel Prize for this, Dowda. She woke up one night and she had this dream where they were making Hitlers. And so she woke up and started calling around to the other biochemists who were involved with this and said, we have to put a stop to it and think about the moral implications of what we're doing. And it's just, that is as much of a golem as one could imagine, that you have a non-quote spiritually living entity that's altering life itself. I always look, the difference between the golem and the human being is that you had a spark of God within you as a human, as opposed to the golem, which did not. So I'll kind of leave it there.
Thank you. So Dr. Sherwin ended one of his one of his articles that I was actually reviewing for this with a lovely story that's attributed to the Kotzker Rebbe, who is told about somebody who can, actually make a golem. And he says, yes, but can he make a chassid? Right? Can he make a human being? Dr. Sherwin warned that it was more of a danger that human beings were going to devolve back into golems if we weren't careful, that it is possible to lose or be brutalized out of the sense of the spark of God, and that not just the creative potential, but also the moral knowledge that it takes to know not only what to create, but whether to create. He would regularly surprise me with answers to moral questions like the one you brought up, and I'll bet you he did to you as well. You would expect him to say, well, no, of course that's wrong. And instead he'd say, no, actually it's all neutral. It depends on what you do with it.
Well, I think that's as good a note as any to end on. Very powerful. Thank you so much, Rabbi Ariel. Thank you so much to all of you for coming out tonight. I want to encourage all of you to visit our website, visit our YouTube channel. There's wonderful content up there on YouTube right now in particular that can also be accessed through our website. And follow us on Facebook. We are the Byron Sherwin Center, where the first thing that comes up if you search that on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at Rav Byron Sherwin. And stay posted. We have a lot of very exciting things in the works. We're working on some partnerships. We're looking to expand our blog. And we're thrilled to have you all along with us for the ride. So please follow us and we'll keep you posted. Thank you again, everyone. Thank you again, Rabbi Ariel. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Have a wonderful night.
Good night.
Good night.